Center Livable Communities webinar. Today's webinar is titled Countermeasure Costs, Putting a Price on Pedestrian and Bicycle Infrastructure, and we will be speaking with Mike Griffiths and Sherry Schafline with the Federal Highway Administration, Debbie Liu with Active Living Research at the University of California, San Diego, and Charlie Zagier and Brian Poole with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. My name is James Gallagher, and I am the PBIC Communications Manager. I will be facilitating today's webinar. For more information on future webinars or to view the archives from this webinar series and others, please visit www.pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. You can also stay abreast of PBIC webinars by following us on Facebook at facebook.com/pedbike. In addition to these webinars, PBIC offers 4 different in-person training courses to provide technical assistance to professionals and community members in developing pedestrian safety action plans and in improving conditions for walking. These courses can be found at pedbikeinfo.org/gettraining. Now I'd like to welcome and thank Mike, Sherry, Debbie, Charlie, and Brian for their presentations today. We will take questions at the end. Sherry, please take it from here.
Thank you. I just want to take a quick moment to try to put this report in context of some of the other national policy and program activities while we have this opportunity, and coming off a very successful Transportation Research Board meeting. But first I want to acknowledge all the folks that contributed to this report and the team effort that it took. Certainly North Carolina's Highway Safety Research Center, the Pedestrian and Bicycle Information Center, and the support Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has been providing through their Active Living Research Program. Certainly the combination of active living and providing good networks for biking and pedestrians, for bicyclists and pedestrians, is a mutual goal and collaborative effort that it's going to take between project development, design, safety, and the health and active living community. So I look forward to continued partnerships with everybody that help with this effort. Next slide. If we start from kind of the bottom of this slide and work our way up, what I would consider the progress we're making as a crescendo of progress that many of the people on this webinar have contributed to over the past decade. We, for the past several years, have had strong administrative support and direction from our Secretaries of Transportation, and that has manifested itself in the policy statements that have encouraged consideration of bike and pedestrian facilities with all of our projects. And then really of most recently, really encouraging our divisions to be working with states and locals on pedestrian and bicycle facility design flexibility with a memo we recently issued this year, or past year, that really brings context-sensitive solution, these various policies, and the surge in working on bicycle and pedestrian issues to the forefront for our agency. And then you'll see it also manifested in the draft strategic plan for USDOT as well as for Federal Highway. It emphasizes the creation of connected pedestrian and bicycle networks. The cost information that's included in this report will really help practitioners at the state, regional, and local level as they plan and budget for individual infrastructure elements that, taken together, will make up these networks. And as we all start working on reauthorization, it was incredibly important that we and everyone else are sending the signal that we are using all the tools and our resources to be cost-effective and efficient. Our leadership's directing us that way, and we hope that in the future we'll be continue to focus on all aspects of efficiency, from implementing performance measures, increasing predictability, and looking to reduce costs so that we can get more done with our available funds and have reliable cost estimates. And at the end of the day, a system that all users can use and enjoy. Next slide. Just a little messaging on this networks that we'll be trying to define and communicate with partners over the next couple of years. We want to ensure that there's comfortable and safe conditions for walking and bicycling along and across roads, improve access to destinations such as transit stations, schools, and access for underserved communities, seamless transition between different facilities, that we're really leveling the playing field with multimodal, and that there's safe intersections and interactions, and again making sure there's full access for all age groups and all abilities as we move forward. And as we work on these activities, we'll certainly have an opportunity to amplify this report, promote it, and encourage folks to use it, and then help improve it over time. As we all know, one of our leadership's priority, and you may have heard this at the Transportation Research Board meeting last week, or if you've seen the transcript of Secretary Fox's keynote speech at the luncheon, he reiterated that pedestrian and bicycle safety will be a focus during his tenure. This report provides cost estimates for infrastructure such as pedestrian crossing islands that have been proven to improve safety. And on the planning, programming, and design side, we'll be doing everything we can do to support the Office of Safety to bring these numbers down that you see up on the slide. And we all have a role and responsibility with that. And we'll be working with infrastructure as well as our operations group as a team here at Federal Highway with safety's lead to continue to help bring these numbers down, and with all of your all's help. Some specifics on ongoing and planned areas of focus. You'll be hearing some design philosophies that will be emerging out of Federal Highways with some resources over the next year or so. Relative to bike and ped on performance-based practical design, as we have complete streets policies coming up against design exceptions and understanding context and cost. We want to make sure that we're designing things with that perspective, and any savings moving those back into helping the whole system function. So we'll be communicating on that over the next year or so. There'll be a lot of work going on in performance measures at the planning level, and we'll be also trying to summarize good practices and measures across the country by communities, and looking at life cycle cost so that folks, we're building it, but we're maintaining it, so you have the asset management side of the investments that's being made. And a lot of work in streamlining. A lot of work's been done in our project development and environmental review office to promote categorical exclusion, batching projects, looking at programmatic approaches for mitigation and historical preservation impacts, those kinds of things. So we really hope people take advantage of that slew of resources that are out there to help bring down their project development cost. In the area of sustainability, we've got a survey underway right now in regards to our INVEST tool that promotes looking at projects from a sustainable perspective and trying to gather information on, are there different uses of materials or approaches where people are starting to document that they not only use kind of, quote, greener approaches, but they got least cost approaches out of that effort too, and try to build that database. So if you have contributions there, we'll look forward to sharing those. Some of the supporting and related programmatic initiatives. Like I said, we're going to survey and try to compile and push out there for everyone to consider bicycle and pedestrian performance measures. If we're really going to try to get mode shift, we're going to have good ways of counting, good ways of describing this, and good ways of comparing the delta as we look at the cost benefit of the investments that are being made. There'll be some work underway with cycle track planning and design research. We'll be able to gather some additional cost information through that project on cycle track design. And then compiling pedestrian and bicycle facility design information and trying to package that better to support decision support tool for designers out there. And kind of a quick way to get some network improvements will be looking at how to capture opportunities for restriping bike lanes as part of routine surfacing programs. Where's that right window of opportunity to get your ideas and information and design ideas in the project development process to take advantage of that opportunity? And finally, there'll be quite a bit of work continuing on with the proven safety countermeasures, and I expect, we've got a Federal Register announcement out there on everyday counts, and we haven't really done much in the bike ped world, so I expect we're going to be getting input internally and externally, and that'll be an opportunity to share good practices around the country and amplify all the good work going on that we can share, and good practices from others around the country. So in conclusion, I want to thank everyone for their hard work on this report. We think it's really going to play an important role in promoting informed investment in infrastructure, and will also help foster livability. You know, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve, give people choices and a better quality of life and access to healthy options. I wanted to offer a couple discussion questions right now, just have folks to be thinking about them and kind of prime the pump as you hear the presentations that you're going to hear. It'll help influence us in our next investments and thoughts in-house in terms of what to do next now that this product is out on the street. So you can see those questions there. We'd like to get some sense of do you plan to use the report findings in your day-to-day work? And do the cost estimates generally seem, can you validate them relative to the work that you've been doing in this field at the project level? And are you finding that there's a gap in the areas of cost estimating that you might think are a priority and there are a demand in your work field so that we prioritize where we might gather some additional cost estimates? And then the final two are, is there any other information or guidance that would be especially helpful in the process of planning, design, and implementing pedestrian and bicycle networks? We've noticed over the years that we and other players have put out bits and pieces of all the things it takes to kind of do the life cycle of planning, the design, the implementing these networks, operation, maintenance, and it'll be useful to hear from you all if we've got any gaps as we move forward. And then how often do you think we need to update this? Is it annually or semi-annually to every few years? What do you think would be appropriate and kind of consistent with the nature of the industry relative to other cost factors? So with that, I will pass it back to James.
Great. Now we will hear from Mike Griffith.
Okay, thanks, James. And I work in our safety office. I'm the Director of Office of Safety Technologies. And just to build off of some of the points that Sherry made, she mentioned the increase in fatalities for pedestrians and bicyclists in 2012, for which we have the latest data broken down by the different crash types. And obviously this is of concern to us. We have a lot of resources and activities in the Office of Safety that can help address that particular problem. One area that we're putting a lot of our attention on are focus states and cities. There are particular states and cities that we identified a couple of years ago that we think hold significant potential to make safety improvements. And we're delivering technical assistance and training directly to those states and cities. And certainly, I'm sure there's folks on this webinar that are from some of those states and cities. I think we've had a lot of positive feedback from working with those states and cities. And actually, we're in the process of evaluating our focused approach to kind of see where we go next with the next iteration of the focused approach. I'm sure many of you are also familiar with the fact that we released PedSafe last year, the Pedestrian Safety Guide and Countermeasure Selection System. That was a significant update from the initial release of 2003, and it provides a really nice resource for looking at ways to improve specific locations. It's basically an expert system that allows you to diagnose and see what your problems are and actually provide solutions to those problems through different countermeasures. So matching up the appropriate countermeasures based on the problems that are uncovered by using this expert system approach. Also has some case studies that demonstrate how different agencies can effectively use these countermeasures. The cost of countermeasures that are going to be discussed by Charlie later here in just a little bit, that really links up nicely with PedSafe, because when you're starting to look at the benefits of countermeasures, you also want to know what the costs are. So you can do these economic analyses to determine what are the most effective countermeasures to address the problems that you're addressing. Sherry mentioned the safety countermeasures. We actually released in 2012 an updated list of 9 particular countermeasures that we're promoting. We selected these countermeasures basically for 2 reasons. One, we know that they're effective based on research efforts that have been done over the past several years, but also they're countermeasures that haven't really received wide-scale implementation. So we think that our agency needs to give them a special push, special promotion, because we know they're effective, but they really haven't gained enough traction in many parts of the country. And on the pedestrian side, we have road diets, medians, and pedestrian hybrid beacons are the ones that we're promoting to give a little more attention to them, given that there's not necessarily widespread implementation across all 50 states with these countermeasures. Also, recently we released a guide for maintaining pedestrian facilities. This is a really nice resource to really give you the details on looking at common maintenance issues with pedestrian facilities and what are some of the ways to most cost effectively handle those maintenance issues, and also look at some of the funding requirements. So I just wanted to give you a quick run through of some of the safety resources and activities that we have, and obviously we're very supportive of this effort in terms of looking at the cost of pedestrian countermeasures. And like I indicated, there's a nice linkage there to our PedSafe expert system. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Debbie Lau. And just so everyone knows, Mike was not presenting slides.
Oh, I am sorry, James. I didn't know that I was going to be presenting the slides from my own computer. Do you have my slides?
I've got your slides.
Okay. Can you bring them up?
I can. Hold on one second.
Okay. I apologize for that.
Just let me know when to change slides.
Whoops. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. I apologize. Well, greetings, everyone, and I am Debbie Liu from Active Living Research Program. We co-supported the production of Charlie Zagier's Countermeasures report, which he will be speaking about after me. And I'm here just to make the health connection to the importance of ped and bike. And our program has a lot of resources out there. We connect with practitioners in many different sectors, including transportation and education and urban planning and parks and recreation. So we're very multidisciplinary. And what we do basically at Active Living Research is that we have the cutting edge research and technical assistance for people like you who are in the field making the changes to create healthier, more walkable, more bikeable communities. Next slide, please. So, you could go. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the program, Active Living Research, and then go over some of the evidence about the importance of physical activity and walking and biking as forms of physical activity and its relationship to health and obesity prevention among both adults and youth, and also just talk, show some evidence on how walking and biking is good for health. Next slide, please. So this is our website, and if you go to our website at www.activelivingresearch.org, you will find research reviews, policy briefs, infographics, a lot of data, a lot of statistics, tools where people can assess the environment for walkability and bikeability. So there's a wealth of resources here for you. Next slide, please. This is an example of one of our infographics, and this is one focusing specifically on transportation, the role of transportation in promoting physical activity. There's evidence here on sidewalks, bike facilities, traffic calming measures, public transportation, and the related outcomes where people walk more, there's less automobile crashes associated with pedestrian injuries, people who have sidewalks are more likely to be active at least 30 minutes a day. So these infographics are available in other topics as well, including on parks and recreation and schools and other topics. And next slide, please. And here's a selection of some of our research briefs and syntheses. Next slide. So we know that being physically active has many health benefits, prevents obesity and other chronic diseases, it relieves stress, and it has a positive impact on mood. But we also know that sitting or lying around too much is dangerous to our health. And there's also research to show that even when adults do get enough physical activity, even when they reach the minimum level of physical activity each day, but if they do sit around too much and lie around too much, they are at risk for obesity and other health problems. So in other words, it's not enough just to be active enough. You cannot cancel out the dangers of sedentary behavior just by walking or biking enough. So you really, in the public health world, more and more attention is being paid to the dangers of being sedentary as well as the importance of increasing physical activity among the population. Next slide, please. And sadly, we all know that driving is one of the all too common and quite difficult to avoid forms of sedentary behavior. And this study looked at how the more miles a person drives, the more likely they are to be obese. And in the lowest quartile of miles driven, only the 9.5% were obese. And then if you look at people who drove the most in the quartile 4, 27.08 people were likely to be obese. Next slide, please. And this is a study that compared, looked at all 50 states in the U.S. and found that higher rates of walking and cycling to work were associated with a higher percentage of adults who achieved the recommended levels of physical activity, and a lower percentage of adults with obesity, and also a lower percentage of adults with diabetes. So the data that you see here is an average of the correlations found for all 50 states. And the next slide. You can go ahead and skip this one. So for children and youth, same with adults. Not enough kids across the nation are being active enough. Also, there's a very high level of kids just being sedentary, watching too much television, spending too much time playing video games. And for your information, we will be having a research review coming out from our program, hopefully within the next week or so, looking at sedentary behavior among youth and the dangers of that and different ways that we can lower sedentary time. So next slide, please. So this is just to show that across the country, the percentage of youth who are meeting the 60 minutes a day of recommended physical activity is quite low. It's the lowest in the middle age group of 12 to 15-year-olds. And we know that as children get older and reach adulthood, their physical activity levels continue to decline. So it's a challenge that just continues to be more of a challenge as people get older, that they are not getting enough physical activity. Next slide. And this is all evidence-based. We know being active is good for body and mind. There's the physical benefits. There's mental and cognitive benefits. And one of the things that we here at ALR, Active Living Research, focus a lot on is the message that being physically active among children is good for their academic performance. We know that in schools, it's much less likely now that kids are able to walk or bike to school. The rates of walking and biking to school have dramatically declined since the 1970s, and that's due to a number of reasons, whether it's fear of strangers, fear of other dangers that may or may not be based in reality. There's also just, the physical environment that has changed. But the opportunities to make the environments better, to make them more walkable and bikeable for kids are there. And then also there's opportunities in the school for better PE, more time for recess. And the argument that we like to make is that being active and being fit has been demonstrated in many studies to be very good for mental focus, for cognition, for school behavior, for school performance. Next slide, please. And we can just go ahead and skip that one. Now here is a study where David Bassett looked at how, what are the different opportunities and behaviors and activities during a regular day where a child can accumulate 60 minutes of their recommended daily dose of physical activity. And if you look at the far left, if a school requires mandatory physical education, a kid can get as much as 23 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity in PE. And then if you look at the third column, walking and biking to school, there's a great opportunity there. Kids can accumulate as much as 16 minutes every day walking and biking to school. Next slide, please. And here we see that in a Danish study that adolescents who walked or biked to school were less likely to be overweight than those who drove to school or who were driven to school. Next slide. And this is a newly published study in the current issue. Oh, sorry, next slide. No, this slide, stay here. Yep, that's good, that's good. This is a newly published study in the current issue of the American Journal of Health Promotion. And it evaluated the impacts of safe routes to school projects in 5 states, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. And it found that walking and biking to school increased by 37% when sidewalks and crosswalks were improved. The importance of this study is that it's the first large-scale study to show that physical improvements to pedestrian environments, rather than just programs or educational campaigns to encourage walking, can actually result in higher levels of walking. Next slide. Oh, there should have been an image there. Oh, there it is. Great. So it is my hope that you will be able to use this evidence and the resources that you will find on our website to continue doing your work to improve environments such as this so that kids and adults will have less of, whoops, next slide. Next slide, please. So they will have more of this, an environment where it is vibrant, attractive, safe, where kids can walk, bike, and play. And this is an image of New York City where some of you may know that in the last several years they have done a lot in policy changes and physical improvements to retrofit environments to make them more friendly to walking and biking. And those changes have worked. I think the rate of cycling went up 262%, or the annual bicycle counts between 2000 and 2010 went up by 262. So dramatic changes happening in New York City, and a lot of this has been led by the efforts of an agency called the Center for Active Design. You can check them out. There's a new nonprofit called the Center for Active Design that is consolidating the work and continuing the work that the City of New York has done to improve their environments for ped and bike. All right, next slide. So thank you very much for listening, and you can contact me if you want any of the information I mentioned, and you can check out our resources. Thank you. And now I will turn it over, I guess, back to James, who will then turn it over to Charlie.
And now we will hear from Charlie Zagier and Brian Poole.
Okay, thanks, James. So what I'd like to do now, along with Brian Poole, is we're going to talk about the resource that was developed. And the title of it is Costs for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Infrastructure Improvements. And so the other authors besides Brian and myself were Max Bushel and Daniel Rodriguez. So let's just jump in and talk a little bit about the tool itself. So next slide. Essentially, what we're trying to do is pull together some of the best and latest information available on how much it costs to build pedestrian bike infrastructure. We maintain the Pedestrian Bicycle Information Center for the Federal Highway Administration, and oftentimes we get these questions. How much does it cost to put in an overpass, or what's the cost of a pedestrian signal, or bike lanes? And so we often have to kind of look around and have had to find the best published resource that we could. And the bottom line is many agencies have to sort of go find this information themselves, or up until this point. So what we decided to do was to try to compile the best and latest information available from different sources, and sort of put them in one place so people could go to them. And we realized there are lots of variations in these costs, but we wanted to have a place where people could go so they're not just making wild guesses or going to an unreliable source. And we realized that every individual treatment may differ a little bit, and we do certainly want people to use their own cost estimators. But mainly this resource is intended for planning purposes, for people to get kind of a basic idea of how much different treatments cost and kind of a range of costs. You can see the link where the full document is located, and James, I guess that'll be in there. People can see that and click on that link, or if you send an email follow-up, it should have that link on it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in addition to having a source of information that's sort of one-stop shopping, so to speak, the idea is that this resource would be useful by engineers, by planners, by municipal governments, and by others that are considering building pedestrian bicycle infrastructure improvements, whether it's for safety or for transportation or for public health or for a combination. And what I really like about this webinar today is we're really bringing together the people from Federal Highway and Active Living Research that really care about both sides of the equation, about safety. Certainly we want to reduce injuries and deaths to people on foot and bike. We also want to increase and improve the health of our citizens. And certainly having regular exercise on foot or bike is one important way to do this. And then finally, we figured this resource is valuable in that, when agencies are considering adding pedestrian bike facilities, that they need this piece of information on the cost to combine with expected effectiveness or benefits of the improvements, and the benefit cost ratios for estimating purposes and allocating resources. Next slide. So where do these costs come from? Well, our team set out and we really looked in a variety of places. One of the most useful sources, of course, was the internet, going to different state DOT websites. We didn't just believe anything that was on the internet, because you can get a lot of misinformation. But we did go directly to primarily state DOT websites, where they would publish the costs that they were experiencing for different treatment types. And we were able to get information from about 40 states. There was also another resource called Bid Express, and this is a transportation bidding website, and we were able to interact with the folks that run that website, and they gave us permission, written permission, to use certain information from the website as it pertained to pedestrian bike treatments. And then we also targeted certain searches of publications and reports from recognized journals or other sources that might be useful as well. So for each of the different costs, we would capture information like the type of facility, the description, what kind of road it was on or what kind of conditions, the total cost and the unit cost, for example, cost per square foot or cost per treatment, the sample size, how many of these treatments were installed. If it was 100 miles of road, that would certainly have generally a lower cost per mile than if it were just 1 or 2 miles. So the number of treatments, it was 50 different pedestrian signals. The cost per signal was generally less than if it were only 3 or 4 that were installed. So we did capture the sample size used to generate the cost. And then what we summarized was the range of costs, because obviously there are many factors that affect how much something costs. We're going to talk about those later. The year of the cost, was it 80s? Was it 2005? Was it 2012? So we wanted to bring everything up to sort of the latest common denominator, so to speak. And we really did not use the older costs. We tried to use only costs within the last few years. And then we would use inflation factors and bring those costs up to the 2012 cost value. We also included a separate item for maintenance costs, annual maintenance costs. You know, many of these infrastructure improvements did require annual maintenance costs. Certainly the name of the state where the cost was. It did differ if the cost was came from infrastructure in South Dakota versus California or Florida or New York. And what was the source? Was it from the state DOT website? Was it from a published report, etc.? And then we had a series of follow-up interviews with certain DOT officials just to make sure that we really fully understood what went into developing the cost, what that included. Did it include labor costs as well as material costs, for example? Because we wanted to make sure that we weren't presenting apples and oranges. They were all consistent costs. Okay, how were the costs compiled? We did look at all the different costs we brought in, to the to one place from the different sources, and then for given treatment, whether it was pedestrian signals or bike lanes, we wanted to sort of make sure that we had some reasonable consistency. So in many cases, we were forced to throw out some real extreme outliers if some costs were obviously not including everything. And in fact, we got into generally throwing out costs that were more than 2 standard deviations from the mean. In some cases, we were able to track down the reason why the costs were, there's discrepancy. In other cases, we just knew that they were totally unrealistic. Now, one thing I will mention that we did not include in any of these costs that really makes a huge difference, and that is the cost for right-of-way. So if you're adding, bike lanes, or if you're adding an overpass, or adding paved shoulders, something like that, in some cases there will be a need to buy right-of-way. In other cases, there won't be. So this was such a large variable that we decided to just leave it out. So any of the costs that we present here, they do not include, purchasing extra right-of-way costs. Okay, so that's really important to remember. We also eliminated costs if they were incomplete. For example, they did not include all of the different elements involved. And then we took the costs after we did sort of a filtering and screening, as I described, and put them into a series of tables. We're going to go through some of these tables and talk about the different information contained there. And finally, just to let you know that what we're going to present in the report itself, it's represented by about 1,700 total cost estimates that we recorded that relate to about 73 different types of pedestrian bike facilities or infrastructure, and these are summarized in tables. And again, they came from 40 different state DOT websites. 5 of those 40 states, by the way, had more than 100 entries each: Ohio, California, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Wisconsin. And the costs for a given treatment do vary considerably by site conditions, by the number of treatments, as I said, by the contractor, by the labor cost, materials costs, all kinds of other factors that we realize there are some normal variations. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to let Brian Poole take over and talk about some of the details, and then I'll pick up and finish things off. So, Brian.
All right. Well, now we get to perhaps what you've all been waiting for, the chance to kind of go through some of these costs and to see exactly how much the cost of these facilities are. So we're going to go through these. This is not all of the costs that we have in the paper. It's a lot of them, though, and we're probably going to go through them perhaps faster than you might want, but I would encourage you to go either look at the paper or look at this presentation afterwards so that you can have a better understanding of the cost. The first cost that we're going to look at is for bicycle parking, and the costs we could find were for bike racks and bike lockers. Bike racks, as most of you probably know, are usually constructed out of metal, and they're the racks that bikes can be locked to, while bike lockers will securely store only a single bike. And if you see the table there, this is how the tables are arranged in the paper. We're going to be focusing mostly on the average, just to give you a rough understanding of these costs. But we do include in the paper the median cost. And comparing those two, you can see if there's a large discrepancy in the costs that we find. And then we also include the range, so the minimum cost that we found, the maximum cost, the unit, and then the number of sources, as well as the number of actual observations for each cost. So for the next bicycle facility we have found the cost for bike lanes or signed routes. Bicycle lanes, you can see on the picture there on the left, are typically, we assume them to be 5 feet in width, and we found the cost unit was by mile. And so the average cost for a bike lane, it would be around $133,000. While the signed bike routes, as designated by the picture on the right, they help direct bicyclists to safer facilities. And the average cost for doing that per mile is around $25,000. Next we have some traffic calming measures that you can install. The first is a chicane, which is a concrete island that helps offset traffic and slows vehicle speed by creating a horizontal diversion. And these can either be just made out of concrete, or they can also be landscaped. You see the pictures there have both of them as landscaped. And the cost for these we found was around $10,000 on average. Another traffic calming measure is curb extensions, which some of you might know as either chokers or bulb outs. But these help to extend the sidewalk or the curb line out into a parking lane, and it essentially creates a pinch point in the road, which can help pedestrians get across the street. And they can either be done by bringing both curbs in, as you can see on the picture above, or it can just be by dramatically widening one side at a location. And these can also be used at intersections to create a sort of gateway effect. And the cost that we found for these was around $13,000 per curb extension. Next we found the cost for diverters. And these are islands that are at an intersection, and they help prevent certain through or turning movements by cars. And they can be placed either across both lanes of traffic, which would be known as a full diverter, or just across one lane of traffic as a semi-diverter. You can see on the picture on the slide the kind of different diverters that are available to use, from diagonal to star, the forced turn, and truncated. And for our purposes, we weren't able to separate the cost by those specific type of diverters, but we did separate it by the full diverter cost, which is around $26,000 on average, or a partial or semi-diverter, which was around $15,000. Next we have a median. This is a raised island that helps to separate opposing streams of traffic, and it helps to limit turning. These are usually narrower than median islands, but they do help facilitate pedestrian crossings, and they help to improve the visibility of pedestrians to motorists. And in certain instances, they can help slow vehicle speed and provide some space for lighting or signage, as you see in the picture here of the pedestrian. And the cost unit for this was by square foot that we found most common, and the average cost per square foot was $7.26. Another traffic calming measure we found cost for is a raised crossing. This is essentially a speed table for an entire intersection, and it's similar to a raised intersection, but it's just the width of a crosswalk here, which you can see in the picture. This encourages yielding to pedestrians, because it increases their visibility, but it also acts as a way to slow vehicle traffic down as they come up to this raised crossing. So we found costs for both the raised crosswalk and the raised intersection. The raised crosswalk was around $8,000 on average, while a raised intersection, because it's larger, was around $50,000 on average. We also found costs for roundabouts and traffic circles. And as many of you have probably seen, these can range from very small mini circles in a neighborhood to large roundabouts with multiple lanes of traffic. And unfortunately, the costs that we found weren't really detailed enough to differentiate between the two. But essentially, these intersections are designed to eliminate left turns by requiring traffic to exit to the right of the circle. And the benefits for these is they can help reduce speed and also improve safety. They can help aid traffic flow. And they can also be used as sort of a gateway to the entrance of a special district or area. And so the average cost here was around $85,000. But as you can see, the median cost was $27,000. And from the minimum and maximums, there was a wide range of costs, based on the size, the site conditions, things like that. And then our last traffic calming measure is on speed treatments. These are speed humps, speed bumps, and speed tables. In case you don't know the difference between the three, the speed humps are typically paved mounds, which are 3 to 4 inches high at their center. That's what the picture is on the right. Speed bumps, however, are usually smaller, and they have a more extreme grade, so motorists would have to slow down at a greater rate, but these speed bumps can also more greatly impede bicyclists, so that's something you have to keep in mind. While speed tables then are very long and broad, or they can be flat top speed humps. So the average cost for a speed hump is around $2,600. The speed bump is around $1,500, and then a speed table is $2,400. Next, we'll move to looking at some pedestrian accommodations. So the first one we have is for a curb ramp. This helps those who are using the sidewalk to get to the roadway for people in wheelchairs or people that have strollers or other mobility impairments. And truncated domes or detectable warning surfaces, those provide a distinctive surface pattern through the bumps that you can feel under your feet. And then domes help to warn visually impaired people of an approaching street, and these are actually required for ADA compliance. So as you can see in the cost information, a truncated dome or detectable warnings is around $42 a square foot. And then wheelchair ramps, we actually found costs both for the total ramp, which is around $800, or per square foot, which is around $12 per square foot. Another accommodation for pedestrians and bikes is for overpasses. And the costs that you see in the cost information are only for bridges. Those were the ones that we could find more than 4 observations for. So in the wooden bridge, we have an average cost of around $125,000. And then the prefab steel bridge is around $200,000. But this was one of those countermeasures where there was multiple different types of structures and materials available. And so kind of combining all those costs, we found that overpasses can usually range from around $1 million to up to $5.3 million. So it's a wide range of costs and significantly higher than just the bridge cost that we have below. So that's something to keep in mind. Similar to the last slide, we have fences and gates. These can help separate pedestrians and cyclists from interactions with the road, and also to keep them separated from railroad tracks. And these can be used in the construction of, bike paths or pedestrian paths, and then also on those overpasses and bridges. So on average, the cost of a fence per linear foot was $130, while the cost of a gate was around $910 each. And these costs are another cost item we found that ranged dramatically based on the type of material that was used for the fence or gate. And then for pedestrian scale lighting, this is something that can really enhance the safety of not only pedestrians, but all roadway users at night. And they can be used on both intersections or along walkways, especially walkways, along commercial districts that can really enhance that at night. And it also helps with improving nighttime security. And we found that the average cost of each of these lights was around $5,000 per unit. Street furniture is next, and these are the items of street furniture that we could find costs for. There are more things that could be included, but these create a buffer between the sidewalk and the roadway, and they help to create a nice environment for pedestrians. And the ones that we found were for street trees. Seen here, the average is around $430. A bench is around $1,500. Bus shelters was around $11,500. And then the trash or recycling receptacle will cost around $1,400. And these costs will obviously vary based on the type of material, but in terms of also what type of tree you're thinking of putting in. In terms of pedestrian crossings and paths, we found a lot of information. First was on crosswalks. Many of you are familiar, I'm sure, with crosswalks, but these indicate kind of where pedestrians are preferred to cross, so the legal place for pedestrians to cross. They're installed both at intersections or mid-block locations. And there's a wide variety of crosswalk marking patterns, as you can see on the figure on your right. So there's, in addition to just the standard parallel lines, there's the types shown and then high visibility types. And while we couldn't differentiate, we think some of the costs that were in the striped crosswalk costs that you see below included some high visibilities, but if it didn't say explicitly, we just put those in with the striped crosswalk. So but the high visibility crosswalks are around $2,500 on average. And then for the striped crosswalks, we found them in a lot of different cost units. The first was each. They're around $770 each. But we also found costs for a crosswalk by linear foot, which is around $8.51, and then $7.38 per square foot cost. Sidewalks was probably our most successful cost that we found. There's a lot of information on sidewalks because it is the most basic pedestrian facility. But there was a lot of difference in terms of the material that we found the cost for, and in some cases it may or may not include curb and gutter. If it didn't say, we just included it as the concrete sidewalk cost. But you can see below that the cost for an asphalt sidewalk or a paved shoulder, asphalt sidewalk is $35, where the shoulder is $5.56. A brick sidewalk will be more at $60. A concrete paved shoulder is around $6.64 per square foot. And then the concrete sidewalk is $32 per linear foot. And on these costs, we assumed that sidewalks were 5 feet in width if it didn't say otherwise. Looking at pedestrian crossings for the paths, these are multi-use paths that can help create a safe environment for both pedestrians and bicyclists, and they help create mobility options that are away from the roadway of automobile users. We assume that these are 8 feet wide, and we found costs for both paved and unpaved trails. So as you see in the cost information below, a boardwalk ran around $2.2 million, while a paved multi-use trail was around $480,000 per mile, and the unpaved trail was around $121,000 per mile. So, and then last, pedestrian crossings and paths. This might not seem that exciting, curb and gutter, but it is used in a lot of these different facilities, and so we thought it was important to kind of separate this from the other costs. This is used in conjunction with sidewalks, paths, curb extensions, median islands, but these costs will also vary widely depending on the scale of the project and then whether you're adding curb and gutter with other road treatments. But as you can see, the average cost for the curb is around $21 per linear foot. Curb and gutter was actually around the same for some reason. That's another also $21 per linear foot. And then just adding a gutter was actually $23 per linear foot.
Okay, so I'm going to just pick up, I mean, you all get the gist of what we're doing, and I will make another comment that some of the cost variations, and as you look at these tables, there's quite a range sometimes between the minimum and maximum, and sometimes the range also varies by whether the projects are put in by contract. A contractor comes in and is paid to do that with their overhead rates and all their costs versus whether it's done in-house. And while we do capture the costs for both, obviously if the projects are done in-house, it's often much less cost-wise, especially for labor, et cetera, than if it's contracted out. But an example here you see is for flashing beacons and for rectangular rapid flash beacons. So the photo you see is an RRFB. It's got sort of a staggered flashing with a sign pointing down, and there's an advanced sign as well, and so that it's activated by push button. You can see the costs average about $10,000 per flashing beacon, or about double that, $22,000 for a RRFB. But the cost can be quite a bit more. It can be up to like $50,000 plus for an RFB as well. And sometimes the cost is higher for a multi-lane road, where you may have up to even 3 different flashing signs faced by motors, one in the median and one on the left and right side of the road. So there are variations. Okay, so another kind of signal is fairly new. It's called the pedestrian hybrid beacon, or some people refer to it as the hawk signal. And it's really, really is the one on the bottom there. You see the 2 photos. But it's essentially a traffic signal with additional supplemental signing, warning the motorist to stop on red. It has a different signal sequence. It's blank until you push a button, and then it activates a flashing yellow and steady yellow, and then a red. And then it's got the full pedestrian signal and phasing traffic signal. It's got extra signing, sometimes advanced marking and signing. So it's sort of a combination of features. The average cost we found about $57,000. The maximum is about $128,000. These are often done in cities like Phoenix and Tucson, Arizona, and some other places around the country. By the way, they're allowed in the 2009 Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Other costs is for signals. This is a pedestrian signal. We found cost units expressed as the pedestrian signal itself, which includes the push buttons, all the signal heads and the wiring, etc. Averaging about $1,500 each, or even the countdown timer, and have that hook up about $700 each. The audible pedestrian signal, $800 each. The signal face, just the face itself, $400 some, or the signal head, just the complete unit, about $550 each. So we have costs for different components of the pedestrian signal. Speed trailer, many of you are familiar with these. Basically a signboard that displays the speed that you're traveling as a motorist, and sometimes it'll warn you if you're speeding. This can often be used in conjunction with police enforcement. The average cost of these are a little less than $10,000 a piece. Can be a little bit more, a little less. Signs, just either the guide signs, warning signs, regulatory signs. Cost on average about $300. That does include installation costs. Obviously a little less if you install a large number of signs versus just going out to install 1 or 2 signs. Next Okay, then pavement markings. We do have these broken down by a couple different types. One is like you have with advanced yield lines or advanced stop lines, like you see here in the photo. Those average about a little over $300 per marking. You can have markings on a median island for about $1.94 per square foot, or even painted curb sidewalk lines, $3 per linear foot. Okay, then pavement markings, we have several types. The one you see in the photo is actually what we call a sharo, or a shared use marking for bicyclists, about $180 per marking. They use a stencil usually to install those. Also pavement crossing, pedestrian crossing markings rather, cost about $360. School crossings, a little bit more. They have the big letters, school crossing ahead, etc., for $470 a piece. Okay, so you get the idea. So here we've gone through most of the 73, and there's some others in there. But essentially, these are to be used only as estimates. These are not absolute costs. Conditions vary. They're mainly intended to be used for planning purposes. If an agency is going to install a given treatment at a given site, you do need to use your local conditions and your local cost estimating folks to take into account, labor costs and local materials costs, etc., or right-of-way costs need to be added in, things like that. So these are only intended to be used as estimates, but they are intended to be used as a starting point, so that maybe there can be some consistency starting to be used from state to state, adding adjustments as needed, and it can help decision makers to make choices on a more cost-effective basis, especially if there are 2 or more different infrastructure treatments being considered, or if you're considering making improvements at multiple sites, and which ones are the most cost-effective. You can take into account the estimated cost as well as the expected benefit. Again, the ultimate goal is to encourage our public officials to construct facilities for better and safer and more walking and bicycling. Okay, so what were the lessons learned from this exercise, from this process? We not only generated costs for over 70 infrastructure facilities for walking and biking, but we know that there are some types of facilities we were not able to find sufficient costs to include in our report. So obviously this isn't the final version that will ever be done. It needs to be updated on a regular basis. We need to add costs for some other facilities, maybe some newer facilities, and we need to continue to explore the factors that do result in cost variations. Okay, next steps. So what we plan to do next is now that we have this published document, it's on our website, we do have an inflation factor that we plan to apply to the different cost factors every year, so we can at least keep them updated in that respect. But ideally, it would be nice in the future if we could add some of the treatments, additional infrastructure, add new cost information, maybe even from a few other states or from some city websites. We also plan to take this resource and include it. So we have the 2 things. We have not only the published document, we also have the more than 1,000 actual cost numbers by state, by type of facility, by roadway type. That's in a database now. So we plan to convert that to a searchable database. So let's say somebody in Florida may see the average cost for crosswalks, but they may want to say, well, now let's look at the cost they got from only Florida cities. So they can go to the searchable database, type in Florida, and type in the type of treatment, and it will give them only a subset of the costs that would pertain to Florida. So, and that's something we plan to do in the coming months. Finally, something off into the future, if and when more funding becomes available, we would like to continue to add new treatments and undergo additional searching for new information as it becomes available. Okay, finally, there was some mention made by Sherry and Mike of effectiveness of some of these treatments. That what we've only included in this webinar today is cost information. But when making choices between different options for infrastructure improvements, it's also often helpful to have the expected effectiveness of that treatment. What is going to be the likely effect on crashes, on pedestrian crashes in particular? And this is where there are new resources, and we have some of them on our databases that have effectiveness information. We call them crash modification factors. And real quick, what that means is if you have a treatment and it's expected to reduce crashes from by 20%, like from 10 a year down to 8 a year, then it would be a 20% reduction in expected pedestrian crashes. The CMF would be 1 minus 0.20 or 0.8. So the CMF would be 0.8. So we have kind of a compilation of some of the CMFs for different pedestrian treatments. And James is going to give you the link to that. But that's one of the resources that might be useful to be used in conjunction with this cost tool, so that you can have effectiveness information, not for all the treatments, but for several dozen of the treatments. And you can have that along with the cost information to compute benefit cost ratios. We also have compiled, we can see the CMF document there on your left. Now the one on your right, we've also done an extensive literature review looking at the effectiveness of many, many different types of pedestrian treatments. It's about a 150-page report. We now have it on our website. You see it on the lower right hand side of your screen, and you can see the link there under the second bullet.
Yeah, and just a note on those links, if you don't want to fiercely write down that link right now, you can go back to a PedBike Info website at a later time, and this whole presentation will be online with clickable links, so you can follow those at that time.
Okay, last slide is we're going to show you now, and Mike Griffith referred to this earlier. This is a new version of PedSafe 2013, and it really has details on more than 60 different kinds of pedestrian infrastructure improvements. It has more than 80 different case studies or success stories, stories about some of the treatments that were implemented in different agencies around the country, and some of the outcomes and details of those. And it also has what we call an expert system, where you can go in and you can enter site characteristics of a given intersection or mid-block or corridor. How many lanes is it? What's the type of traffic control? What's the traffic volume, et cetera? And you enter the problem, the crash problem or safety problem you're trying to address, and it will take these more than 60 treatments and give you a short list of the most likely candidates that will be effective in reducing the crash risk. So James, with that, we'll turn it back over to you see if there's time for questions.
Great, yes, thank you very much. We do have some time for questions. If you've not done so already, please go ahead and enter your question into the question box, and we will try to answer that. I will answer a couple quick questions that were presented already. This webinar will be archived. The presentation slides will be available for download at pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. And the countermeasure cost paper can be found at pedbikeinfo.org/cost-paper. First question I have, with the cost estimates, what all is included in that? Does that include the planning, the engineering, the right-of-way, or is it just construction?
Yeah, so what we found is that it includes the full installation cost, but as Charlie noted before at the beginning of the presentation, it does not include the right-of-way costs. So this does include, that was what we talked to the DOT officials about, is they confirmed that it does include the full installation cost. The only thing that it would not include would be that right-of-way cost.
Great, thank you. Mike, could you name some of the focus cities and states?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we have that X on our website, which I can bring up right now. But if you go to a Federal Highway Safety website, we show all the different states and cities, and I'm just pulling it up now. But in terms of the actual pedestrian-focused states, we have California, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Illinois, Louisiana, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., Kentucky, Georgia, and Florida. Those are the states. I think I got them all. And then we have a number of pedestrian cities, which I won't name off now, but we can certainly get those to the individual who's interested after the webinar.
Yeah, it's about 29 focus cities. It's generally the bigger cities in those 15 states that Mike mentioned.
Okay. Scrolling through the questions here. With the bike lane cost, is that a cost per side or is it for both directions of bike lanes?
We believe that that's per side. So I guess if you wanted to have bike lanes on both sides of the road, you would just double that cost per mile.
Okay. And in the chart, you mentioned the sources and observations for the cost information. What is the difference between the sources and observations?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Sorry if I wasn't clear. So the sources would be each. So say that one of the costs came, or one source would be the North Carolina DOT, and another source would be the California DOT. But if we had multiple cost observations for a bike lane from the North Carolina DOT, that's where the additional observations would come from. So even if the North Carolina DOT was the only source that we had, but say they had cost information on a bike lane for 10 different observations of costs, then we would just include all those costs as one. So that's the difference between the sources and observations.
Okay. A frequent blanket response to requesting pedestrian and bicycle facilities is that there is no money. How do we get pedestrian and bicycle safety process and procedures for funding safety projects as systematic and certain as we apply to other auto-focused installations?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that, and if anybody wants to chime in. I mean, every state DOT, as far as I can tell, has money. It's a matter of priorities. How do you allocate your funds? And, you know, some agencies maybe have pedestrian safety not necessarily equal in terms of priority as facilities for automobiles. In fact, many of the treatments we talk about actually benefit motorists and pedestrian safety. Things like median islands and paved shoulders and certain kinds of signalization. So I wouldn't just say that, you know, there's pedestrian treatments and non-pedestrian treatments. Certainly there are treatments like bike lanes and things that do primarily relate to bikes. But it's a matter of priorities and how you allocate your funds and where your priorities lie in terms of, obviously, we need to try to be working toward complete streets so that we're providing transportation choices for people and not just providing your roads for drivers. So others may want to comment.
Yeah, this is Dan Goodman at FHWA. Just one thing I'll add, Charlie, to what you said is that I think a lot of the answer to that comes down to having data, and that's something that we're working on hard here at FHWA, and I know a lot of people are working on developing better data so that we can inform those conversations, and we can start to set performance measures and benchmarks that I think will start to inform those conversations when we start talking about, you know, our investments and our priorities. We'll actually have data on the pedestrian and bike side that's equivalent to the data that exists on the car side. And I think that's a really important part that we're missing now, but that we're working hard on.
Dan, you talking about data for crash effects, safety effects?
And also just usage of facilities. I think it's the benefit of the infrastructure, which I think you talked about a lot, and the crash reduction factors. But then it's also getting a better understanding of what kind of usage we can expect when we put in different types of facilities.
Good.
All right, thank you. What about ongoing maintenance costs of individual facilities? Maintenance cost concerns are often a barrier for getting decision makers to support these capital investments. Is it possible to include maintenance costs in future versions of this paper?
Yeah, that's a real good comment. You know, some of the information did have maintenance costs, but you know, it varies so much. I mean, you know, maintenance of a sidewalk. Well, that varies based on how old the sidewalk is. You know, as it gets older, you know, and it gets cracks and other things, then maintenance becomes more necessary. And plus, some agencies don't do a very good job of maintaining a facility, so there may not be very good maintenance costs, but that's certainly something that would be desirable to obtain. We did not find very much good information out there on maintenance costs, but it would be something to look for maybe in the future.
This is Sherry. I think regarding asset management, Federal Highways has obviously put a lot of resources and support into helping DOTs develop asset management databases and help that inform maintaining the investments that we've already made. So hopefully there's a lot of transferable practices and database and approaches that as the bike and ped facilities grow and get mapped, and we start using crowdsourcing to identify gaps and snow removal and all kinds of potholes and things like that, that those resources and that databases will help inform the balance between new investments and maintaining what we've built, just like we're doing with the highways. And, we can work with partners to try to figure out who has that role or responsibility to maybe add that in somehow.
All right, thank you. There was also mention of the crash modifications factors papers. Has there been any consideration of consolidating the crash modification factors with the costs so that they are presented together?
Okay, that's a good comment. There actually is a tool. I think SafeTrack at UC Berkeley has done something like that, or tried to do something like that for California costs. There may be somebody on the line that knows more about that. But essentially, what we have tried to provide is the two ingredients, if you will, for calculating benefit-cost ratio. Unfortunately, we don't have effectiveness information for many of these infrastructure improvements, especially the bike treatments and some of the lower-cost pedestrian treatments. There's not really good research out there to really quantify a CMF. But certainly, the hope is that agencies will take, the best information that's available, like from the Federal Highway CMF toolbox on effectiveness data, combined with their costs that they expect for different treatments, and calculate their own benefit-cost ratio.
All right. Here's another question. The range of costs is in some cases is quite extreme. How much of the variability is due to aesthetics and other non-essentials?
Okay, now good question. So some of the costs vary very widely because that's just the reality. I mean, the example I like to give is overpasses. If you try to put an overpass over a 6-lane highway with all the amenities, and even some overpasses require, facilities for people with disabilities, whether it's elevators or escalators. I mean, you can run into, what, $5 million or more, whereas you can have a 2-lane road with just a simple, steel bridge, and it may cost a few $100,000. But yes, there certainly are designs. We can think of examples. There's the Rattlesnake Bridge in Tucson, very attractive, and a lot of thought and money went into making it, with the visual features, artistic features, and certainly those kinds of costs are incorporated in some of these. Many of them are pretty straightforward: pedestrian signal or crosswalk or signs. There's less frill and extra cost there, but yes, certainly in some cases there would be those kinds of costs included.
Okay. In doing your compilation of all these costs, did any of the costs surprise you? And if so, which ones?
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's a real good question. I mean, let me just say that when we look at some of the wide range of costs, I mean, some of them were just clearly wrong, or clearly did not include labor costs. So I guess those surprised us, but we knew they were not accurate. But the costs for some of the more expensive treatments were somewhat of a surprise. I guess the $5 million for overpasses. That I'm sure there are overpasses out there that cost even more than that. nothing really comes to mind other than that. I think we were really interested in some of the costs for some of the newer treatments like rectangular rapid flash beacon or pedestrian hybrid beacon, and we did find a fair range in costs, and we have talked to some of the engineers about that to verify those costs. And as I said, one reason for it is whether the treatment was put in by city forces or state DOT forces, or whether they're let out to contract. And contractor costs, will generally be much higher.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, one thing that surprised me when we were compiling these costs is maybe not the cost of an actual facility, but that so many places were using outdated costs for their own comprehensive plans or as part of some official documents, that they were using costs that were from documents from 2000. And so it just showed me how important this was to have as a resource that's updated and at least adjusted for inflation, so that we can have accurate cost information to go to use in your practices.
Yeah, I remember also one thing that was found was that a number of agencies used cost estimates that came from our earlier version of PedSafe.
Yeah.
So we did not include those costs in there. We really wanted to go directly to state or city DOT sources, or only from reliable published documents. Like, for example, that we would know that was from a specific MPO and that they had developed their own individual costs. So we didn't just use information that we didn't verify as being authentic and accurate.
Okay. We got time for, I think, 2 more questions. Has there been any attempt to collect costs on non-infrastructure countermeasures, such as biker pedestrian safety education or enforcement campaigns, or on education of safe speed limits?
No. I mean, we did not do that as part of the study, and that would be another study for another time. I mean, folks from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration might be able to give you some estimates for some of the education or enforcement programs that they're aware of and that they cooperate with around the country. And those can have an extreme wide range of costs, certainly, depending on the magnitude and extent of the program.
Okay. I think we can fit both these in pretty quickly. And I got this question several times. Was the unit cost of the the RRFB per location or per individual beacon support post?
I believe that was each.
Well, that was for each installation.
For each installation.
Yeah. So it would be, would cover traffic coming both directions. There'd be, the flashers and signing and marking for each direction. Yeah. So it'll be per location.
Okay. And the last question for today. Did you find any good sources of information on the life cycles of different facilities? And do you recommend focusing on local life cycle estimates for similar materials that are used for non-ped bike facilities?
Okay, we did not have estimated life cycles for different treatments. That's something that could be done. Actually, that's a good idea. And certainly there are ranges there in terms of life cycles as well. But that would be another useful input. In fact, that's another necessary assumption or input into a cost-effectiveness analysis.
Yeah, and just to note that, I think in the actual database that we have, it should be downloadable as an Excel spreadsheet on our website. In the notes, we did note if there was a life cycle. I believe that it was for probably less than 50. We actually had that information. But if somebody's interested, they could actually go and try to track those down using that Excel spreadsheet.
Okay, well, thank you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for discussion. Thank you again to our speakers, Mike Griffith, Sherry Schaffline, Debbie Liu, Charlie Zagier, and Brian Poole. And thank you to all of you for attending today's PBIC Livable Communities webinar.